let's get rolling on this. So you know this. If the world was perfect, it wouldn't be. Yogi said it the best. We don't live in a perfect world, but let's think about these three security things. Energy security, we know that underpins the economy. All healthy economies in the world depend on energy, reliable energy. And it turns out it takes a healthy economy to invest in the environment, okay? And we'll see some data on that here in a little bit. I call that the radical middle. And you know, global context a different way. We geologists love these ternary diagrams. Everything has to sum to 100%. So energy security, economic climate. Energy security, we need reliable energy. Every global leader on the planet is after reliable energy, affordable energy, and of course, low emissions energy. I don't use the word clean. I sometimes do, but that's a slip up. Clean doesn't mean much, but we're talking about low emissions usually when we say that. If you want 100% low emissions, that means you get 0% of everything else on a ternary diagram. How does that sound? Realistically, these things come together. They play here in this radical middle. There are trade-offs, right? There are trade-offs between these things, and we have to start talking honestly and openly about those trade-offs. That's our radical middle. We've been dancing around it. Let's just go take an 8-year romp. You know, pre-Paris, we're kind of down here with economic security. Paris pulled us toward climate. And COVID said, no, come on back. You know, let's talk about the economy a little bit. And then net zero emissions started to be the big thing in Europe. And that got pushed farther a year and a half ago, COP26, all carbon. And Mr. Putin said, no, let's talk about energy security again, right? And then COP27 in Egypt pulled us back this way. The African nations spoke with one voice. Oil and gas will lift us from poverty. So we've been dancing around the radical middle. It's no wonder it's confusing. It's no wonder it's difficult. So when we think about energy security, we've got to strive to be both completely factual and factually complete. I said this to Mr. Manchin's first Senate hearing on climate, okay? And there's a difference here. They're both important. So I haven't showed this ever. I have never talked about the big chill. There's plenty of people that talk about it ad nauseum, it seems. But these are the data. I actually pulled down the 15-minute data for the month of February. And it got cold in Texas. It was below freezing, the highs and the lows. This is the Dallas temperatures. And there were blackouts in Texas, and here they are. And that's what all the reports focus on, is the blackout period. But it was really cold for 5 or 6 days before there were blackouts, wasn't it? And so when you look at that, you know, that ain't secure. This is kind of a typical 39,000 megawatt hours in winter demand. Well, it went way up. And guess what? Day on day, natural gas rose 6 days in a row to supply that demand. More than double what it normally is in the winter. And then we went back down some during blackouts and back kind of to normal. So let's dissect this a little bit. Nuclear, what happened? Well, from normal to blackout, we lost a pump, a circulating pump in South Texas project, so it was down 14%. Let's take a look at coal. Cranking away, full tilt during very cold, some coal piles froze. So coal went down about 9% during the blackouts. Solar we don't depend on much, and it didn't disappoint. So down 33%, but we don't use that much in the winter for a lot of reasons. Here's wind. Wind we do depend on, and it dropped 55% in the blackouts. A lot of turbines froze. They weren't usable. And finally, natural gas. And you'll hear natural gas fell 40%. That's a completely factual statement, and it drove the blackouts. It fell from where? A peak that was already more than double what it normally is. Let's look at the factually complete stuff, okay? Gas actually went up 233% from its normal during blackout time. Now, it didn't make it. We have to continue to fix gas and do things, but these are the data. These are what happened during the big chill, okay? Yet Mr. Bloomberg puts out an article, it says blackouts highlight need for clean energy. We gotta blah, blah, blah. I guess you can publish these things when you own the media. Bloomberg in Bloomberg. Fascinating. Well, that was on the 19th of January this year. I spoke in Colorado to a bunch of CEOs. A few days later, it got really cold for a couple days in Colorado. Really cold. What happened? Kind of like our big chill. Not much hydro. Here's solar. Here's wind. Coal. And gas. This isn't secure. Blackouts in the US are not secure. We depend on electricity 24/7, 365. We get really upset when it's not there. Aren't we spoiled? Welcome to the real world, okay? The real world don't have secure energy, most of it. And I've been lucky. I've been in over 60 countries. They're color-coded by number of visits here. And I've met a lot of people. I met this man about my age in Ethiopia. He had tears in his eyes when he told me his grandkids would have something he never had. They were starting in school. They had literally just come out of the bush. These are all from our film, Switch On. If you go over to Nepal, you meet Sanakanchi, who's cooking indoors with wood like almost 3 billion other people in the world today. And they're dying. Kids are dying of pneumonia, mothers of cancer. Almost 3 million a year, every year. It's what COVID-19 killed in 2020. We shut down the economy for that. Doesn't have to be happening. Come up back into Africa, into Kenya, and you see light bulbs dangling from a church, which doubles as a school, and these kids in their uniforms, this is Kibra outside of Nairobi, one of the biggest slums, marching across mounds of garbage and polluted water. This relationship between poverty and environmental pollution is real, every single country that I've visited. They just can't afford to clean it up. In Vietnam, we meet Thon, who carries her crippled son on her back every day across this plank so he can go to a school. Over and over, this repeating theme, got to get my children some education. In India, some of the worst poverty I've ever seen and some of the most severe wealth. And 1.4 billion people. It will pass China in population next month, okay? Consumes about a quarter of the energy per capita of the Chinese. And then back to the Western Hemisphere in Colombia, the Arhuaco people living in this village of Gunchukwa. We brought First Solar for 8 days here, put in a 3.5 kilowatt array to power, put light bulbs, not power, put some light bulbs in mud huts. We call that electrified. It's light bulbs in mud huts. And these kids, half of them will die before they're adults of a tooth infection or dysentery. They just don't have what we have. When I was with the chief or one of the mama I was at last night, we were very powerful to turn those lights on and have them see one another in their own village at night, which they hadn't done before except over a fire. So you start looking around the world and you see this relationship, this income. Here's the least livable cities in the world. Guess where they are? Where it's poor. And here's the most livable cities, the blue. Where? Oh, where it's rich. Us. When you start to think about emerging economies and the yellows and reds, it's everywhere, but really concentrated subequatorially. Living in energy poverty, they need affordable energy to get started. Something to get started. Developing nations, the pink colors, they have energy, but it's not reliable to them. So they need secure energy. They need something that's reliable. Every global leader is after that. And then the rich nations, there's not that much blue, is there really, when you look at it. We want climate security. We want it clean. We want it low emissions. Well, there's other cleans. Here's clean air. The cleanest air in the world is where? Green. Oh, it's rich. Where's the dirtiest air in the world? Red. Oh, where it's poor. Over and over, water, soils. Poor countries can't afford to clean up the environment. They have different priorities. 60% of the population live in some form of energy poverty. 60%. It's not right. We know it's complex. We know it's not binary. The senator and Lillian said it perfectly. It's not binary. It's complicated. It's not clean and dirty, good and bad, black and white. There are no believers and deniers in that sense. It's complicated. We've got our film Switch On. It's going around Africa now from students in universities around Africa. They're starting to talk about energy poverty in Africa where they're living in it for the first time. It's extremely powerful. So I have a paradox. Energy won't end poverty, but you can't end poverty without energy. I said this, I think, for the first time about a decade ago. You have to have energy to have a chance to get out of poverty. It is time to power the people. So we have trends in this world. My slides are all color-coded, gray coal, green oil, red gas, etc. These are the most current data. You can see the COVID dip. Coal and oil are still going up. They're starting to plateau. They're very dense, but they make a lot of CO2 when we burn them. Gas and nuclear are rising gas tremendously globally. They're very dense. They don't make much CO2. And then you have hydro growing and solar and wind and things getting started globally. They're not dense, and they don't make much CO2, okay? So there are trade-offs. There's these trade-offs between secure energy and environmental protection. There's the Great Recession dip in energy. You go into recessions, we don't consume as much energy. That's what it looks like. Here's COVID. People said it's structural, it won't come back. It's already back, okay? We're already consuming more energy than we ever have in the world. In fact, we're consuming more coal and oil than everything else combined still, by a lot. All right? So no source of energy has decreased globally, not even hay. We consume more hay than we ever have. There's more people. And now you'll hear, completely factual, wind and solar are growing faster than any other form, and it's true. Exponential growth still, remarkable, getting cheaper and growing. To make it factually complete, we scale it. It's in the data. Wind and solar account for about 10% of the growth in energy demand in the last 15 years. 10% of the growth, not the base. The scale is remarkable to power the world, if you will. Coal has been coming down. We've cut it in half in the rich nations. It's been going up in Asia. And the rest of the world, just a little bit. Coal is an Asian story. And not just China. Pakistan announced recently going up in coal. Bangladesh is going up in coal. It's an Asian story. Except when things get stressed, then it's a German story, okay? Germany went up in coal when they cut off gas. Oh, you mean we need it? Reliable, affordable energy. You bet we do. Lay natural gas on top of it at the same scale, very different. Look at the right side. Gas is going up everywhere in the world, except Europe, kind of flat. The ratio of gas to coal has gone from 39 to 91%. And it will pass. Gas will pass coal in the next few years. It's a global story. Good thing. Has a lot of advantages. What's going to go after gas? Well, here's India, the last 10 years. A lot of coal and oil in India. Remember, this is percentages, not absolute scale. India consumes less energy than China. China's coming down in coal, starting to, in percentage terms, not in absolute terms. More people. Here's the US, and here's Europe. Very interesting trend, isn't it, when you go from poor to rich. We lower the coal and oil. We add a lot of natural gas, some nuclear, and solar and wind. I was in France speaking at leadership at Total Energies last week. France, nuclear, mentioned earlier. Isn't it interesting? Is that the future of clean energy? A lot of us who study energy think it is. Has a huge role to play. Maybe we can solve climate, the comics are even involved, without nuclear power. Yeah, we have solar and wind, and data steps in and says, no. And kind of the face changes just a little bit. Data is a funny thing when you really start to deal with it. So our energy resources, this is work done at the Bureau over the last 12 years. These are the big shale gas and shale oil basins. Green oil, red gas. Yellow is what's been produced so far. The size of the circle is the technically recoverable. It'll change with technology and price. So look at what's been produced and what's still there. We march around the Barnett. You got, about maybe almost a quarter of it produced from 16,000 wells so far. The Fayetteville, almost a half. Haynesville, different story, not about, an eighth from the number of wells. Here's the big Marcellus. About an eighth of the technically recoverable has been produced from a large number of wells. You get into the oil basins, Bakken. I was with Bud Brigham's company when we were working this many years ago now, over a decade. Eagle Ford. You see that 24,000 wells drilled there. And here comes the Anadarko, and we got the Niobrara, and then in comes the Midland Basin, and finally the Delaware, the big ones in oil plays. Over 150,000 wells. Put 6 zeros on it to kind of start to estimate the cost of that. 150,000 horizontal wells. Remarkable trends. We're producing over 11 billion barrels of oil equivalent from these basins now. 11 billion. That's only about 40 years of technically recoverable. So when you start thinking it lasts forever, we put it in perspective. And here's the data. The Fayetteville and the Barnett, they've peaked. They're rolled over. The Haynesville had peaked, but it came back. Many of us said it would with technology and price. But let's scale those and add the Marcellus and the Utica, which are larger. And now the gas that gets produced from the oil basins, because a lot of gas comes with the oil. And here's the conventional gas. So U.S. natural gas is growing, but look at the structure within that. A lot of them have already plateaued. It's not forever. On the oil side, a similar trend. The early ones, Bakken, Eagle Ford, Anadarko, Niobrara, you add the Permian, and then conventional oil. And we're still kind of growing in our oil production. There's a huge COVID hit, the big cliff there, but coming back. But again, a lot of structural within those basins. We've gone from 5% of our oil production to 60% from shale in 15 years. And the same for gas. It's incredible. But look at the right side. Look at the structure of that curve. Unless we get some pretty neat new technologies or are allowed to actually build pipelines to move some stuff around, this is going to struggle to maintain that kind of growth. As a result, our gas price was really volatile pre the Great Recession. And thank you, shale, which doubled. Look at the price. It saved the Obama administration and our economy. Trump rode the wave, etc. We don't like gas still. I took this picture in Aspen. You know, they're passionate about global warming. They sit outside. We all do under these things. It says right on the propane tank, no global warming, you know. Thank you, Aspen. We appreciate your insights. I spoke in California just last year. We had 10 of these things. We're in short sleeves. We didn't need these. Does California know propane is gas? I don't know. Maybe. They seem to be banning hookups for gas, but they love these outdoor heaters. Look at the price now, the last couple years in the U.S. It's come down again, very volatile. I'm going to scale that to Europe. Have you seen the equivalent in Europe? 6x. Now, it's come down too. Pretty mild winter. But that kind of ratio, 4 to 6x, still exists. Why? Here's why. This is the production, consumption of gas, North America the most, Asia on down. Here's the production of gas in the world. There's only 2 regions in the world that consume more gas than they produce. Europe and China. This is a trend. Natural gas reserves, we've gone up a little bit in North America, but look at Russia and the Middle East. And then everybody else. About 50 years, if we never find another NCF of gas, which we will, look who doesn't have the reserves. China, Asia, and Europe. Look at LNG imports. Who's importing LNG? Asia and Europe. They need options to natural gas. They're not producing it. They don't have the reserves. So what have they done? They've brought things down by policy and gone to a third. This is electricity sector, solar and wind. And that's quite interesting because the price, 60 cents a kilowatt in the summertime, that's a lot. 4 to 5x what we pay for it here. You can't promise to always get cheaper. Solar and wind are cheaper at the plant gate. LCOE, that's a disingenuous number. It's confusing. It's not cheaper to you and me. You have to make it reliable. Okay? And that costs a lot of money to do that. Policy underpins this mix. I was in Oslo 3 weeks ago. I saw Helga there when I was there. Europe is struggling to kind of understand this. I put out a piece in Fortune about optionality. We've got to have options. Energy optionality. Markets need options. Same story in oil. Asia consumes the most oil. Here's where it's produced. There's only 2 regions in the world that consume a lot more oil than they produce. Guess who they are? Europe and Asia. They need options. Here's the oil reserve story. Same thing, about 50-year supply. Look at the reserves of oil in Asia and Europe. Essentially none. They need options to oil for transportation. Enter the electric vehicle. Red and purple is China and Europe. They dominate the EV market. They talk about it loud globally, but most of it is being done there. We're going to go to 55 million electric vehicles supposedly in the next 2.5 years, powered with coal in China. In order to, Dilbert, I didn't have any accurate numbers, so I just made this one up. Studies have shown accurate numbers aren't any more useful than the ones you make up. How many studies showed that? 87. All right. So Let's take it, some number. I have no idea where this came from. 50% of the EVs are going to be powered by, by 2040. 50% EVs. All right, what would that take? 300 million charging stations. Fit the EV forecast in there, and you see it has to go up to 700 million EVs. We've got about 1.4 billion vehicles in the world today. This is a non-growing. 700 million EVs times 5,000 batteries per car, 3.5 trillion new batteries that wear out. 3.5 trillion? We have tens of billions in the world in our gadgets today. How are we going to do that? And this is why you're starting to see some Germans, other than the fact they produce combustion engines, kind of saying, well, maybe. Appear to be cooling on the EV adoption. The Kia boss said, it's going to be tough. Ford says they're losing billions on EVs. It should be a startup in Ford. So there's a lot of dialogue now around EVs. It's finally becoming a little bit more realistic. EVs take 700% more metals than combustion engines in the battery, not in the car, in the battery. 700% more. The metals are on the right. Turns out, so do solar and wind compared to natural gas and coal because they're less dense. It just takes a lot more metal to collect less dense energy. ICEs, you got to drill and you burn them and produce emissions for climate. Well, solar, wind, and EVs, you mine them and you dispose them in landfills. And that stuff comes from somewhere. Oil and gas, these are the top 3 producing countries. The U.S. is right in there. And here's the top producing countries of these critical metals. Producing countries. This is where they exist. Who processes the metal? Watch close. Brilliant. Belt and Roads, brilliant. By the processing for all the solar and wind and battery supply chains. Excellent move. And you need EVs because you don't have gas or oil. We got to recognize this. You know, we got to begin to understand this. And we love our EVs. Colorado loves them. No oil on the Tesla license plate, you know. No tires. I don't know. People don't know where stuff comes from. But I love mining. You may as well say it. Love mining. Colorado's a proud mining state. I wonder if Senator Hickenlooper is going to get that going in Colorado. He's a good friend. I don't think so. Optionality matters. Small vehicles, yeah, electrify them. Cities, plug them in. Mid-size, a little more dense, maybe fuel cells with hydrogen. The big vehicles, liquids. I'm not flying to Paris last week on a battery plane. And I won't be, okay? So this brings us to climate security. Emissions are coming basically flat and coming down in the rich world. They're going way up in Asia. Not a surprise, coal. And they're starting to go up in the rest of the world a little bit. Asia emits more CO2 than the rest of the world combined. Why? Because of us. Huh? Above the red line, nations consume more stuff than we produce. Below the red line, nations produce more than they consume. Here's the U.S., 5 billion tons of CO2 every year, and we are consumers. We consume more stuff than we make. China, 10 billion tons, they're producers. The non-OECD in blue are producers. The OECD, they're club of rich nations, us, Europe, are consumers. We're saying, send us our stuff. And we're asking them to do what? Emit our CO2. Cute little shell game. It's called offsets and other names. Zero emissions? Does that help the one atmosphere, our climate? Of course not. It's not a solution to climate change. Asia makes our stuff. Look at what you're wearing. Look at your phone. Look at your car. Look at everything. To reduce emissions for real, some weird combination of these 4 things. They all have to happen. It's got to be affordable, scalable, in a time frame that matters with technology. Natural gas replacing coal, nuclear replacing coal, hydrogen, geothermal, hydro starting to grow, carbon capture, direct air capture. Vicki Hollow, good friend's company, pushing on this. Solar, wind, and batteries, and efficiency. These are the levers. These are the things we can begin to do. Optionality is needed to reduce global emissions at scale, for real, not trading offsets. Yes, the climate is critically important. I said it in this room in a TED Talk a year ago, only it was a lot bigger. But so are some other things, air, water, and land. And they're interconnected. They're very tightly connected, our environment in this world. Imagine living a life so carefully that there are no signs you lived at all. That's not you. Nobody in this room is going to qualify for that. Okay. And nobody in the world really wants to. They all want to begin to get wealthy. Here's the reality. And again, I said this to 1,100 UT students last year. Yeah, biofuels, you got to do a lot to make them. They're not clean. You burn them in the end. You're converting carbohydrates to hydrocarbons. Solar, wind, and you got to mine, manufacture, deploy it, transmit it, dump it in landfills. Some of it's toxic. Is that clean? You know, have you seen the giant solar farm in the Middle East? It's incredible. Look at the artwork. That little thing, that's the artist and his shadow being cast in the sand. It's incredible when I saw that image to me. Oil and gas folks, you need some sand artists, okay? Make it a little more cool, because you impact everything. Everything. Getting better in the rich world, not so good in the developing world. Here's the reality, there's nothing renewable. We've got to quit teaching that at UT. Comes from the earth, gets made, gets dumped into the atmosphere or back in the earth. We do it over and over when it wears out. It's not renewable. Got to be this head fake. That picture cracked me up. So I shared it with you. Okay. So the transition, I'll wrap it up here. There's not one. We're not transitioning from anything. We're adding energy. And we're trying to lower emissions. It's this dual challenge. Right? And it's not easy. Here's a scenario I ran. These are infinite. A 30%, quote, renewable. Coal and oil down, gas and nuclear up, and everything else up a lot. Here's our historical energy demand rate or slope. I lowered that and started to roll it over by 2065. Most of that comes from non-oil and gas, as you see the trends. Here's the emissions from the coal in that scenario, from the oil and from the gas. Here we are today, the gap between those, and look in the future. Quite a bit of lower emissions from substitution, but it doesn't address it all. We need to capture the carbon directly or from the air, from these things, to start to lower that part of the emissions. There's a lot of oil and gas in that picture, a lot. Those who study these things know physics won't change. These reservoirs decline. You have to replace 70% of it by 2040 and 60% in the gas just to keep up. Are we doing it? Are we investing in it? Are we building the infrastructure? Is the U.S. leading in this? These are the largest producing companies in the world, producing. That's where it matters. They actually sit on a lot of reserves. You add the two Russians together, they're bigger than Aramco. I have to have all 5 of the IOCs to reach that scale, including the ones I work with. All 5. How does that make you feel? Does it make you feel secure? Okay? So here we are with our global income. Fade it to the world at night. You can see where the lights are on and where they're not. Here's the energy mixes around the world. They're really different. Scale them to be proportional to consumption. And they look like this. Asia is consuming half of the world's energy today and growing. If I get rid of oil and coal, this is what's left. Some want to get rid of gas and nuclear. And there's even those who want to get rid of hydro. That leaves 6% if we did it instantly, which we can't. But thought experiment. Let's dim the world's lights by 94%. How does it look? How does it look? Okay? It's the past. It's not the future. Turn the lights on. Get more lights. Get more energy for hunger and clothing and shelter for people who have none. 1 billion people. Education and healthcare, they need energy to start to lift up. Women are going for water, cooking with wood. Not in the schools. Population is tied directly to education. Fertility rates, directly. Energy. Immigration, migration, investing in the environment and cleaning up climate, mitigating and adapting. These are the challenges in the world today. It's not binary. Secure energy addresses many of these things. So I'll leave you with these thoughts. 6 billion people live in energy poverty, some form of it today. Net zero poverty. I've got a piece through UT on an op-ed just through today. Matt just wrote me on net zero poverty, what it means. Energy optionality is vital. All forms have benefits, and they all have impacts. Let's end this false competition between solar and wind and gas and nuclear. We need these things. They do different things, different resources, and we got to balance climate, energy, and economic security. No one owns the truth. That's why we're at universities. We seek it. Hopefully, we teach kids how to think, not what to think. Shaming is destructive. Civil dialogue is vital in this conversation. Not simple, but solvable. So my day job's out here at the Bureau, really proud of that group for the last 24 years. My night job's at Switch, a 501c3. Grab the TED Talk. We got a big PBS series out now that was picked up by World Channel. We're in 100 million households now. I interview 2 people on every episode. Great dialogues, Ernie Moniz and Dan Yergin, et cetera, et cetera. They don't agree on everything. That's the point. 25 minutes, let's have a civil dialogue and think a little deeper. You can stream season 1, season 2's coming out in a week. We've already filmed season 3. I got an assignment for you, and then I'll leave you alone. I'm a professor. You get an assignment. Go to our website and click that big green button. When you do, it's going to take you to this page with me looking kind of scowly. Click that, download the presentation beneath it. It has all these slides, animated in PowerPoint, plus some, and my voice is sitting under them. That's what you'll get. Grab those slides. Here's your assignment. Give a talk this year, pick the slides you want, to one group of 20 people. Church group, school, civic group, scout troop, one group of 20, okay? Give a talk. It'll be hard. You'll get better. And then send me an email when you do. 200 people, 4,000 instantly reach live. And share it. You ask what you can do that. All right? Thanks.